I'm Chris Pourteau, and this is the story behind the stories in Chronicle World's Tales of Dystopia.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Chronicle World's Tales of Dystopia.
It's episode 257 of the Author Stories Podcast. Thanks for tuning in each day. Go to hankgarner.com, and in the right-hand sidebar, you can find links where you can subscribe to the show. If you find some episodes that you like in the archives, would you do me a favor and share those with your friends, family, and loved ones? I would really appreciate that. I hope you enjoy all the great shows that we bring you, and the reason we're able to bring you such great content is because of our sponsors, and I would like to thank some of those sponsors. If you would like to sponsor the show and highlight your product or service to our audience, go to hankgarner.com, and there's a link in the menu there at the top that says advertise, and you can highlight your product or service to our audience. Nick Breaker's book Essence, Book 1 Septima, one of the best science fiction writers I know. Nick Breaker weaves some of the best science fiction adventure stories you'll ever read. Essence, Book 1 Septima is a must-read. Go pick it up today. There's a link to it in the show notes. Third Scribe is the place for authors and readers to meet. Go to thirdscribe.com. You can set up an account for free, and you can link up with some of your favorite authors and find out what's going on with them. Authors, you need to have a place where you can highlight your books to your audience. Thirdscribe.com is built especially around books, linking people that love books with people that write books. Go visit them today. Thirdscribe.com. Tell Robin the folks that I sent you. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. Episode 20 just dropped today. It is amazing. With stories by Jess West, Rhett Bruno, Eamon Ambrose, Bob Williams. Tales is my favorite monthly publication. Go pick it up today and get that old pulp goodness feeling. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, episode number 20, out right now. Also, don't forget, we're highlighting Tales of Dystopia this week, and we've got a special interview show with some of the authors from it, but Chronicle World's Tales of Dystopia, 13 stories of animals and humans interacting at the end of the world. This project also benefits Pets for Vets, one of the most outstanding charities out there, linking up rescue animals with veterans that need some companionship. So go pick up a copy of Chronicle World's Tales of Dystopia. It's only 99 cents while it launches. At the end of the show, don't forget we have an audio book clip from Richard Cleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have a band of authors with me, going to talk with me about a brand new release that released today when we're recording this. When you're hearing this, it will have released 2 days ago. But it's Chronicle World's Tales of Dystopia, the Future Chronicles, book 17. And if you remember last year, we had Tales of the Apocalypse, and this is a kind of a follow-up to that, but with some new energy, some new vigor, and Chris Pourteau and Samuel Peralta are going to start off the conversation here while we introduce you to that. Welcome, fellas.
Thanks for having us, Hank.
Hi, Hank. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have two of my favorite people on with me right now. We've got some other folks waiting in the wings, and we're going to bring them in just a few minutes. But Chris, why don't you start, kind of, if people are not familiar with the whole Tales concept, what is the line of Tales books? And then we're going to ask Sam how this book dovetails with the Chronicle Worlds and how this new partnership came about.
Yeah, sure. Actually, time flies. It was 2 years ago that we published Tales of the Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And so, for the listeners, Tales is spelled Tails. And 2 years ago, we published the first Tales of the Apocalypse. And essentially, it was born from a short story that I wrote about a dog's perspective in a zombie apocalypse, sort of The Walking Dead meets The Incredible Journey. And that particular story, it was published by itself, and it got some pretty good reviews from readers. And I think it touched a lot of people because it had the dog's perspective on this apocalyptic event. And so then I thought, well, why don't we do a whole collection of stories about various apocalypses, however you say that, multiple apocalyptic scenarios, and had a bunch of had 14 tales and Tales of the Apocalypse, and it was also very well received and is doing has gotten a lot of good reviews on Amazon. And we wanted to find a nonprofit that we could benefit, an animal-centric nonprofit, as the tales were animal-centric. So we wanted the benefits to a nonprofit to be animal-centric. And David Bruns, one of the authors in the first collection and in this new one, found Pets for Vets, which we'll talk to one of the representatives in a little bit. The long story short is they take shelter dogs and train them to be emotional support animals for returning veterans who have emotional issues like PTSD. And they're a national nonprofit, 501c3, and they're just a fantastic organization, and we couldn't have picked one any better to go with the Tales collection. So that started a couple of years ago, and then I was talking to Sam, I don't know, a year and a half ago, Samuel Peralta, and thought, why don't we do this same thing with as a Chronicle Worlds title? And in the original collection, we had about half the authors set their stories in their already established worlds, best-selling worlds in many cases. And I thought, why don't we do that for every one of the stories this time? Every one of these authors is fantastically talented. They have readers that love the worlds they've already created. Why don't we give them the opportunity to write a tale, T-A-I-L, set in that world that would be fun for their readers and would just help us create a great collection for Chronicle Worlds. And I'll turn it over to Sam at this point. But this is the second edition of Tales. This one, Chronicle Worlds, Tales of Dystopia.
Samuel, bring everybody up to speed real quickly about Chronicle Worlds and the Future Chronicles and this behemoth that you've built, and tell us, if you would, what your reaction was when Chris brought this to you.
Sure. Just for all of the listeners out there who haven't been following, I created and am the series editor for the Future Chronicles, which is an anthology series of speculative fiction that's been going on for the last 2.5 years now. It's been an incredible experience for me, and although this is book number 17 in the series, there are actually 21 books presently in the series, and there's about 8 more books to go that have already been planned and that authors are writing for. Essentially what the Chronicles does is it takes established writers who've won Hugo Awards, Nebula Awards, World Fantasy Awards, or who have been bestsellers on the New York Times or USA Today, and it pairs them in an anthology with new authors who have exciting voices, but who may not be as well known. Each volume is organized around a theme, such as robots or AI or dragons. So we put out the Dragon Chronicles, the Immortality Chronicles, and so on and so forth. And it's been immensely popular. Each volume has gone on to become the number one in either science fiction, horror, or fantasy anthologies, and each has been a hot new release once it's been released. The Chronicle Worlds is a subset of the Future Chronicles, and what it does is it takes an idea or theme that's been originated somewhere else, such as the Tales of Dystopia volume, where the Tales concept, writing from the point of view of the animal, was already previously done by Chris in his Tales of the Apocalypse, as you said. And what we do then is we port it into the Chronicle Worlds format, and that series has become immensely popular as well. We've had several authors' worlds been featured, And when we talked about it with Chris, it seemed like it would be interesting to see how that concept could fit in the Chronicle worlds, because the Chronicles is able to spotlight this in front of its readers. At the moment, we've got a subscriber base of about 55,000 people who read the books and who follow the books and who are always looking for the next big title. But I'll tell you an interesting story that not a lot of people know. Chris actually told you about a story that he wrote that he made the cornerstone of Tales of the Apocalypse and led to Tales of Dystopia. Well, that story was one of the stories that I did not accept for the Chronicle book, the Z Chronicles, which was about zombies. And it was not because I didn't like the story. Chris actually turned it in super late.
Yeah, that's not a surprise, really.
So it was. So
that makes me feel so much better.
Yeah. Sam, everybody that I have to edit now is going to use that as an excuse.
They'll have to go out and publish it on their own then. See,
right.
Look how successful you were.
Right, exactly.
But I looked at it and I thought, my God, this is a fantastic story. I knew the quality of it right away. It was a zombie story from the point of view of a pet. And although I wanted to publish it, we were so far in the publishing process already. I think we were about to let to release the book that I would have had to put a halt on the entire process, and it didn't feel fair to the other authors at that point in time. So I said, sorry, Chris, I can't do this.
Right.
And so he went on, published it, and Tales of the Apocalypse was a great success. So Tales of Dystopia, Chronicle World's Tales of Dystopia, is kind of my way of circling back and finally closing the loop on that story that I always wanted to publish but didn't. So thank you very much for coming to me with this, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Well, absolutely, it's been a pleasure working with you. And anytime I can be late to a party that helps anybody, I'm very happy with that. So excellent.
Samuel, one of the points of pride that I have with this podcast is that we have gotten to chronicle a lot of happenings in the publishing world and in the indie publishing world specifically over these last 3 years. And we literally have chronicled the birth and the growth of the Future Chronicles along the way, and it makes me super happy to see the first time we ever talked on the show. I think it was episode 5. It was the birth of your anthologizing, and now here we are. What did we say? That number 17, the Chronicle series.
Well, this is actually number 21.
Yes.
The reason why it's numbered that way is because Amazon likes everything nice and orderly, and there are actually 4 volumes Chronicles that my publishing house Windrift doesn't control, so I can't actually put them in there, although there are really 21 of them.
Wow.
For example, one of them, the Alt Chronicles Legacy Fleet, is controlled by Amazon itself.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, hey, Hank, just one thing I want to say about Sam, and I want to make sure we get this in. I was going to say I want to get it out of the way. That's not the way to say it. I want to make sure we get this in. I attribute the gates being open for indie authors to 3 things. The very first thing was Amazon making it possible with their dashboard and their publishing process, and it's clunky from time to time, but on the whole, without Amazon doing that, there would be so many silenced voices today. That's the first thing. The second thing is Hugh Howey making it as big as he did through Amazon's gateway that showed everybody else, hey, you can come from zero background. You don't need a traditional publisher. You don't need an agent, but you can write a great story and you can get it out there in front of people that want to read it, and you too can be a success. That's number 2. Number 3 is Samuel Peralta and what he's done with the Future Chronicles. The group, the Future Chronicles group, has something like over 500, maybe closer to 600 authors in it now. And he has, through these books, through these collections, he has given so many unknown voices a platform to find readers, to share their stories with people. Nobody, except for maybe Q Howie, Amazon itself, have done more for the in-author voice than Samuel Peralta has through these collections. So I just want to get on the record.
Absolutely.
I'm going to cry now.
Well, this is why we don't do video, Sam.
Right.
Well, the thing is, what I've found in doing the Chronicles is that there's so many good authors out there. I came across so many stories that I thought people should be reading, and that really was the impetus for this, because I just hated that readers went to the old stalwarts, not that the classic science fiction authors and fantasy authors are no good. They're fantastic, but it would be great to expand readers' access to all the new stories that are coming out that are well worth looking for. And that was really the impetus for the Chronicles.
And these stories are some of the most heart-wrenching, engaging stories, and probably because they feature pets who are so close to all of our hearts. And that's one reason that I think so many people just kind of shook their head in agreement, Chris, when we first partnered with Pets for Vets a couple of years ago, and we were like, well, of course, that's who we ought to partner with. You know, that's
right.
They're doing such good things, and they're doing such good things with the creatures that we love, and they're benefiting people that we love who are doing things that we appreciate. And so, Chris, why don't you bring in Sean Quigley, who is here representing Pets for Vets, and talk a little bit about our relationship as a group of authors with Pets for Vets and the work that they're doing.
Sure. Well, thematically, so many of the stories, they aren't just about an animal. They're about an animal and its relationship with the humans in the story. And they're set, in this case, dystopian worlds, in the original apocalyptic worlds, but you could generalize that to say very difficult circumstances. They're stories of survival in very difficult circumstances. And so if you take that theme and you look at Pets for Vets' mission, I mean, you're working with veterans who've experienced the horrors and tragedy of warfare. You're working with dogs that are maybe days away from being euthanized. And who themselves, to even get to the shelter, you can only imagine what they've been through. And so the trying times that both the veterans and the dogs have seen, that brings them together and forges that bond, that's exactly the overarching theme of many of the stories in these collections. So it was such a natural pairing. Now, I'm going to let Sean speak for himself, but I will say that I haven't found a more deserving cause than Pets for Vets. They've just been a fantastic partner to work with. They help us with selling the anthologies, and of course, we love being able to contribute revenue from the anthologies to that organization. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean and let him speak for Pets for Vets.
Well, thank you very much for that glowing endorsement of Pets for Vets. I certainly appreciate it. I certainly appreciate you all having us on and allowing us to be a part of your success as well. That's exactly right. It's been mentioned before that Pets for Vets is a national 501c3 organization. We basically have a dual mission. It's kind of been mentioned already. We work with military veterans. We use the power of a human-animal bond to provide a second chance for shelter animals. We rescue them, we train them, and we pair them with one of America's veterans who could benefit from having a companion animal. It's really a fantastic dual mission, and it's very near and dear to my heart. Being a veteran myself, I had a buddy of mine that called me about 5 years ago and suggested that we look at this particular organization and try and get a chapter started in the area in which I live. And I did a little bit of due diligence. I did my research on Pets for Vets, and it was something that kind of immediately spoke to me. It's something that I very much appreciate being able to be involved with, because at the time I was looking for some way to try and make sure that the help that I was lending to veterans have a really strong long-term impact. Anything I can do to help veterans, I'm really into. And then when I noticed that this was a group that also took dogs from shelters and trained them to be together with to be a companion animal for our veterans, it just was something that was near and dear to my heart, and I was all in for one. And it's a program that I absolutely adore working for, because you're right. You mentioned that, the veterans that we work with, they've had, most of them have had a very difficult past in the military, and the dogs that we rescue frequently, the rescue dogs, although they can't tell their own stories, I know you guys are telling a lot of their stories for them, but a lot of them have been through difficult times as well. And just as a quick example, something that you kind of touched on briefly, I can give a firm example of. For my particular chapter, one of the dogs that we rescued that has been together with one of our veterans now for a couple of years, we found out after we adopted the dog from the shelter. Of course, they didn't tell us this beforehand. They told us afterwards that the dog was actually 1 day away from being euthanized. Wow. And having heard that post-adoption and seeing how fantastic that dog turned out to be, in terms of forming a bond and a very close relationship with a particular veteran that we matched that dog with. It was something that is really, really powerful for me and for a lot of others that kind of come into contact with that particular veteran. And he kind of tells them his story and the dog's story as well. So it's a great organization, and I very much appreciate you all allowing us to be kind of a part of your world and your stories. So thank you very much for that.
Well, Sean, I just want to say that I don't know that we've actually mentioned this explicitly, but without the service of the veterans that you're serving, and some of our writers are veterans too, and we'll be talking to them in a few minutes, a couple of those in a few minutes. But without the service of the veterans that have preserved our freedoms in this country and in Canada as well, which is where Sam is located, we wouldn't be able to publish. We might not have a free voice to speak our stories. So the very least we can do is provide some remuneration for that in the form of the donations we're going to be making. So it's a fantastic pairing. It couldn't be any better.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
Sean, what kind of feedback do you get from the servicemen and women who are paired up with an animal? Do you track the animals after they've been placed, and do you keep in contact with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do actually provide lifelong support for the animals that we place with our veterans. So we do, of course, we follow up with those veterans regularly, and we also provide avenues whenever we can for us to get together with those veterans if they so desire. I'll give out another quick example is that we have a Veterans Day parade that's coming up here shortly, and some of the veterans that we've paired with rescue dogs are going to be involved in that parade. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing them again and talking to them again. But our trainers follow up with all the veterans. Frequently, they do some additional training immediately after placement as the dogs and the veterans kind of settle in to getting to know each other and kind of forming that bond. Our trainers are right there working with them, but we do have a lifelong relationship with that veteran and the animal that's been placed with them. And it's something that I really like to see, because you get to see the growth of the bond that forms between the animals that we place and the veterans as well. It's something that, first couple of days, they're kind of getting to know each other. The dog's getting to know their new environment and their veteran, and the veteran's kind of getting to know the dog a bit as well. But then you frequently you see in more longer term, you see a really strong bond there that develops, and that's what we work really hard to try and make happen when we're looking for the dogs to pair with our veterans. Is that we look for dogs that are very, very people oriented, and dogs that are very calm. And frequently, I hear back from our veterans, even after a couple of days, and sometimes after a couple of weeks, that they may have had the first really good night's sleep that they've had in years, because their little furry battle buddy is right there with them. And that's something that, studies have shown that you frequently see improved mental and physical health, reduced stress hopefully some reduced anxiety, some reduced depression from having your battle buddy around, your little furry battle buddy. And that's something that, again, it really warms my heart when I hear that feedback from these veterans about how strong their bond has become and how much that's helped them since the dog's been placed with them. So it's wonderful.
Hey, Sean, I have a question for you. Do you work exclusively with shelter animals like they would pull off the street and put in the shelter, or are you guys able to also work with sort of finding homes or retired service animals as well, those that are actually used in the military? I was just curious about that.
Yeah, we work with shelters. We work with rescue groups, but we do have some criteria with which our dogs have to fall between. Age range is something that we do take into consideration, strongly into consideration. We don't want a dog that, I hate to say it, but is old. A dog that maybe is because a lot of the war dogs whom I still love greatly. A lot of the war dogs when they're retiring, they might be 7, 8, 9 years old, somewhere around there. And those dogs, we look at them as being a bit too old for our particular program. So we try and stick usually age between about 2 and 5. I don't want the dog to be too young to have a lot of, I guess you could say puppy in them, which might be a little bit too much for some of our veterans to deal with. And we don't want them to be that old either, because we want the veteran to have a nice, long relationship with their companion animal as well. So we kind of look for that sweet spot between 2 and 5 with our shelter and our rescue dogs.
Very cool. Thank you.
Chris, let's bring in a couple of our authors. Looking over the list of contributors to this one, some really, really phenomenal names, and we're going to go through kind of the list of those in a few minutes. But let's bring in Ann Christy, who has a story called The Last Pride, and Justin Sloan, whose story The Last Bobcat. And let's talk about that. Welcome to the show, Ann.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, glad to have you. And Justin, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much.
Excellent. Anne, tell us a little bit about your story and how did you get to be a part of this collection?
Well, this is actually a pretty important one for me, and I doubt anybody really knew that I had all of these coincidences come in at the same spot. But I'll tell you. For me, the release date is actually pretty important, because 3 years ago today, I came home for the last day of work after 28 years in the military. And so, it's a nice coincidence. But also, I was in the very first of the Future Chronicles, and that was with Samuel Chronicles. I was one of those new authors that he's making bestsellers. And now, 3 years later, I'm the bestseller. And, I'm getting paired in there in that way. So it kind of had a nice round circle to it.
Sam, you've made a star. Many stars, but we have one with us here today.
Well, it's fantastic. Actually, several of the early authors in the Future Chronicles now have had book projects that have hit the USA Today bestsellers list, the New York Times bestsellers list, as well as Wall Street Journal. So it's just been incredible to see.
Yeah, and there's a lot of us out there. Sam is very humble, but there's a lot of us out there. He's a wonderful guy for the indie world. But also, in that first time when he took a risk on me and put me in the Robot Chronicles, I created a story called Pepper Inc. And that went on to open up this whole new world that I wrote about. And The Last Pride is actually a story set in that world. So I've sort of combined everything about my journey into this one story to go into this book. And so for me, this one's really important.
Yeah, for sure. Anne, how do you approach a story like this? So we know that you write books of your own, but I'm always intrigued at how the creative process is different when you join up with a band of authors and you're all writing, toward a particular goal or theme. Do you approach the creative process differently?
I do, actually. In this case, I wanted it to be set in the Pepper world, so at least I had a place to start. And I got lucky in this one because I'm working on Protector, which is the penultimate tale in the Pepper Inc. universe. And I was kind of in a little bit of a bind because The Protector only references the inciting incident. It never actually lives the inciting incident. And The Last Pride gave me the opportunity to explore that inciting incident in a whole new way. I was looking at it from the animal perspective, and really it's all about them. And so for me, although the approach is a little different than a straight up book, it turned out to be a nice coincidence.
For sure. What was the idea that you got for how you were going to bring a story like this one to it? Did you had the world, you knew what you wanted to do? Where was that first kernel of story? Where did that come from?
It came from a painting.
Really?
I just started painting about a year ago. The characters were stuck in my head and I couldn't get them out. And I said, well, let me see if I can draw them. So I bought a whole bunch of paint and I started painting, and I haven't stopped since. But I was painting a picture of Protector, who is a very special elephant. And when I was painting him, I realized he needed some things around him. And so I thought, what about the lion? And so while I was painting that lion, I was talking to you. And I said, that's the story right there, those two. So for me, it came from a painting.
Wow. I think most people will automatically gravitate toward a dog or a cat, our traditional pets that we think about. Why more exotic animals for you?
Well, in this case, while we were talking about pets, I wanted to kind of address the duality of that entire world, because essentially it's sentient robots and humans as two different species who see the world very differently. And one of the reasons that Protector exists at all is because humans believe everything belongs to them, including wild animals. So in a way, I was addressing that sense of ownership that humans have, as if life and death belongs to them exclusively. And so I was twisting it a little bit, definitely stretching the boundaries of what's a pet, but it's kind of a play on concepts.
I love it. I think it works fantastically, and I love that you stretched not only the idea but those of us readers as well, because it's really immersive, and I really like what you've done.
Thank you,
and thank you for your service in the Navy. That's a huge accomplishment, and thank you for doing what you do for the rest of us.
You're very welcome.
Justin Sloan, Marine Corps veteran. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got paired up in this group of misfit authors.
Yeah, so it's the story kind of comes from back in my day. I was raised in Whidbey Island. It's just up in the Puget Sound area. And we always had a bobcat that was at the corner. It was like in this big cage, and we'd walk by it on the way to school every day, and it freaked us out. Like bobcats, they're not humongous. They're not big tigers or anything. They're, as a big adult, it's not that scary, really. But right. As a little kid, you're like, oh my God, there's a bobcat there. It's going to eat me every day.
It's going to eat my face off.
Yeah. So when this opportunity came up, I thought that would be a fun story to approach, like the idea of that bobcat and what it thinks, all by itself, with little kids being scared of it. But then when the apocalypse happens, how that bobcat comes out and looks for help and partners up with a teenage girl, in this case, that came from one of my other stories, and how it ends up learning to rely on that teenage girl and help her. And at the end, I won't spoil the story, but learn some lessons along the way. And it was kind of fun timing too, because I had just done a similar story in a totally different type. Like this is obviously not for little kids, but we have a Minecraft series that we've done. And I had just done a first-person point of view, first-person present story from a wolf point of view. And so I kind of already had this like in my mind of like, that was a lot of fun. I showed it to one of my readers, and he was like, dude, why do you not always write in first-person present? and so I thought, well, this is great. I get another opportunity to explore it, but from a non-children's story point of view. And then it all, I think I found out about all this. Like you asked how I was paired up in this. I had been interviewing a lot of people for a podcast I was doing called Military Veterans in Creative Careers. And that included David Bruns, who you mentioned earlier. And he had talked about how he was in one of these anthologies, the Tales, what was you guys mentioned earlier?
Tales of the Apocalypse?
Yes, that one. And I thought it was a great idea. I love the concept. And so when I heard about an opportunity to get involved with this, I leaped on it for sure.
I want to ask you, like I did Anne, is your creative process different when you're approaching a project like this as opposed to something you're creating all on your own?
So I do a lot of collaboration. I'm kind of like the collaboration guy nowadays. And that comes from working in video games where I just loved that whole process where you're whiteboarding stuff together and coming up with ideas and thinking how stories can fit in other stories. So in that sense, it's a tough question because half of what I do on my own is with other people and in the same way or similar ways. But yeah, the stories that I've done purely on my own, it's totally different because you can just sit back and do whatever the heck you want, right? Just have fun with it. Throw a big giant chicken running through the field if you want. Reference to one of my weird stories. And when we're doing these, I love the concepts of some stories I do where I'm interacting with others. There's this thing I'm doing with Michael Anderle where we all have series. There's like 10 of them or so, but they're our own series kind of, but they're all in the same world, so you can throw stuff in there. References to each other's stories and whatnot. And then these kind of anthologies. I've been in a few now. It's funny when I started this, actually, like when I think I first got involved in this anthology, I don't think I had a lot of success. But now by the time it's finally come out, which wasn't that long ago, a few months maybe, it's kind of dovetailed. So kind of exciting in that sense.
I'd like to get the two of you, your input on kind of how you handled the animal-human interaction in your stories. Anne, did you take any special care, or was there any particular goal you were writing toward to really bring out, I don't know, to maybe personify the animals and bring them closer to the humans there, or are you trying to highlight a different relationship between animals and humans?
Well, as a secret, I really love to get into the headspace of other things that are just not like me. And so, I mean, I humanize zombies. So what do you do? And in this case, I was actually working with 3 distinct species: the robots, the humans, and the animals. I mean, in terms of, overall. And for me, it was a matter of just really stopping with the dialogue. You have to stop the dialogue and look back at it and really try to change it into motion without making it so it alienates the reader. So for me, it was super difficult, but I loved it. I actually found that I really love writing animals.
Awesome. What about you, Justin? What's the interaction between humans and animals like in your story?
Yeah, I think I might have even gotten asked to back down on this. I don't quite recall, but I definitely went with like the approach of where the animal is basically of the same mindset as us, but knows that it can't communicate with us. There's even a point in the story where the bobcat nods to the girl and then wonders if she noticed that he did that and quickly runs away because he's not supposed to. I've always enjoyed those kind of stories where you take on that they're just like another person, but like an alien race where they can't quite communicate with us, but they have full cognizance.
Actually, I just wanted to say, Justin, I really loved your story. When I read all the stories back to back, I was like, oh my God, that's so brilliant. So you did a really good job if that was your goal.
Oh, thank you so much.
I read the book and I've not found a single story that I hate yet. So I guess that's good.
That's good.
We call that fantastic editing.
That's
what
right.
we call it. If it's uniformly excellent, you can thank the editor.
Yeah. Now
I'm kidding. It's all due to some
really?
excellent stories by those
I
guys.
have to say that Chris is one of the best editors I've worked with in the Future Chronicles, and I've worked with about a dozen of them already, and Chris is right up there with the top.
Let me tell you what. Let me tell you a little something about Chris Pourteau, because Chris and I are very close friends. Our families have vacationed together. We're close. And our friendship has survived Chris editing me, so I'll just put it that way. And he edits with a double bit axe sometimes, but
hey, that's the way good editing is, right?
Yeah, but he's
agree
gracious
with
about
that.
it. Yeah.
When the first time Chris edited a story of mine, I actually stood up from the computer and backed up and said, that can't be my story, because it was covered in red. It was literally covered in red.
Yeah. Yeah, I would not want to be a kid in Chris's house.
You know what my takeaway from that is? I need to use a different color.
Well,
but no, you know what?
It's
easy. It's easy to be a good editor when you've got great writers, and every single tale in here is written by a fantastic writer. There's not a clunker among them.
And we're going to highlight the rest of the stories here in just a minute, but I wanted to interject something about human pet interaction. And one thing I really loved about all of the stories in this collection were the unique takes that each one brought with how we as humans and these beloved animals interacted together. The story that I wrote for it is about a little boy who is autistic, and he's also deaf, and he is kind of witnessing the end of the world in front of him, and the only thing he can cling to is his pet dog. And I really wanted to get inside the head, if you will, of the little boy, and kind of show how strong that bond is, that when you feel like no one else in the world understands or can empathize at all, that the bond of that pet is the strongest thing there is. And I love that everyone had a little bit different take on that, but all of those relationships are strong, and that's what I loved about this series.
Well, and your story, Hank, is a great example of how we dovetail very nicely with the Pets for Vets mission. I mean, like you said, when there's nothing else that you can relate to, but you can make that emotional connection with that animal, and it might save you. Literally, it might make sure you make it through the night. And your story is a great example of that. All the stories have that to some extent in their thematics, but yours was particularly effective with the boy with autism. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the other stories, Chris and Samuel, if you want to chime in on some of the authors that you know and have worked with, and some of the stories here. We've got Samuel, you wrote the introduction to the book. Chris wrote the foreword. Then we've got Harlow C. Fallon, who brought a story, John Monk, Risa Walker, and Christy, of course, Jennifer Ellis, one of our long-term friends, Justin Sloan, of course, Daniel Arthur Smith, never heard of him. And then
he'll appreciate that when he hears this.
Of course he will. Roberto Calaspin.
There's Risa Walker, and
yes.
she was actually an Amazon Breakthrough Novel Awardee, and she's written a story which falls within her series, the Kronos Worlds, part of the one of the that's built around the book that won the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award. We've got
Elena Georgi. Elena Georgi.
Yep.
And David Bruns.
Cherry Lasota wrote in her Paradisi Chronicles world.
Right.
Nice.
And we've got David Adams as well. And he's essentially writing about a white tiger that's in the middle of a world that's been ravaged by war in one of the world's universes that he's constructed.
Mm-hmm. Symphony of War is the name of it.
And I think you've covered everyone.
I think so. I think so. 13 stories in all. Is that right?
Yep. They're set in all kinds of different dystopian worlds. Some of them are on the far edges of the galaxy. Some of them are right here on Earth. Roberto Calas's kind of stands out. It's set in his Scourge book novel series, and that's essentially zombies in medieval England. So you've got knights walking around in armor with zombies taking over. And so his is an excellent historical dystopian piece.
And you did mention John Monk's story, right?
Yes.
And John Monk's story as well, yeah.
Were there any stories that surprised you, Chris, when they came in for one way or the other?
Well, I knew they were all going to be good because we had very specifically solicited the particular authors that we brought in. Jennifer Ellis's story is set in her Mosquito Constellation novel world, which is basically near future apocalyptic world set in Canada, in the mountains of Canada. And I was kind of surprised she didn't write about a cat, because she wrote about the apocalypse. But Roberto's story, I'm a historical nut, especially for like medieval times, and so reading his story was a particular pleasure. I'm a big fan of his trilogy, his Scourge trilogy, so that was fun. Risa Walker's story, I was not, I have to admit, was not familiar with her Chronos world, and so it was really cool seeing the her story has a number of time jumps or time shifts. And it was really fun seeing how she works that universe. So, I mean, they were all good in one way or the other.
I'll tell you one story that you won't see in the in this is my story, because I was scheduled.
That's right.
I was scheduled to write something, and it's actually within the world that I created in the Zoo at the End of the World novel that I wrote for a Dominion Rising box set, and I thought I would be able to make it, but guess what? I was late. So.
So it's not just me. It's not just me. See, talk about that. That is exactly that. That totally mirrors what happened with Unconditional and the Z Chronicles, right? You were a little bit late to get it into the collection. That's perfect.
Chris, and I'm bummed about it because the Zoo was amazing. I would have loved to.
Yeah. I read a version of the story that Sam didn't quite get revamped for this collection. It was a great story, and I was looking forward to it. But yeah, I didn't quite make it.
Sam, talk just a minute about the Zoo at the End of the World, because you wrote a tale story, but it just didn't make it here. But that was your first novel. How did getting that story out make you feel as a writer?
Oh, it was great. I've been I love doing the work for the Future Chronicles, but really it was a side trip that was totally unexpected, and I'd always wanted to write a novel, and I got the chance to do that when I was invited to do a boxed set. Dominion Rising, and some of the folks who are here in the room with us right now, and for example Daniel Smith, who's not here, but there's a couple of people in the Tales of Dystopia. We all contributed to this box set, and my contribution was Zoo at the End of the World. Essentially, it's about a young girl who is a caretaker and more at a private zoo, and a comet is about to hit the Earth. And you go through the whole sequence of events from the time they discover the comet to the time that the comet actually hits the Earth, and there's no turning back. Nothing is going to change. In fact, as you go through the story, you realize that the comet is indeed going to collide with the Earth, and it will be the end of the world as we know it. The only thing is that most stories focus on the human aspect of the end of the world and the tragedy that humankind will be destroyed, but nobody really thinks about the rest of the living things here on Earth, the animals, plants, everything else on Earth that has a right to survive as well, and that's what that story was all about. So the story I was going to write for Tales of Dystopia, which may end up in Tales number 3 if Chris was going to do that, because it'll be on time for that.
Absolutely,
is actually a little story set in that world where all of humankind is going to be destroyed by a comet. So I'm looking forward to Tales 3, even though we've just launched Tales 2.
I think we just made a love connection.
Yeah, and if it's going to be in there, then automatically everyone should just buy another box of tissues, because if you read Zoo, you know what's coming.
Oh yeah. Chris, as an editor and writer, how do you approach editing a collection like this when you've got a particular theme? Does that affect how you approach each story, or is your editor hat just your editor hat? Is it different when working on a collection as opposed to just a standalone work?
Oh yeah, because you've got, in this case, 13 different voices that you want. There's a balance you have to strike, okay, and it's sort of a multifaceted balance. The first balance is I'm a writer as well as an editor. I don't want to impose, I do it this way. I don't want to impose that on anybody. But I'm also an editor, and I have an editor hat. So I think, okay, I always try to put myself in the reader's shoes. Is this paragraph too long? Is this detail necessary to move the plot forward? Is this dialogue clunky, or is it natural? that's the way I approach it, but hopefully not from a, well, if I'm writing it, I'd do it this way perspective. I don't want to do that. So that's one balance you have to strike. The other balance is you've got 13 different voices, and you want to maintain that uniqueness among voices or for each voice, right? So, David Adams writes for his fans like David Adams writes, and Roberto Calas writes for his fans like he writes, and Anne writes for hers like she writes. And so you want everybody to maintain their own voice. On the other hand, you have to promote a uniformity of theme, of cleanness in the, just from the typo perspective, but also, do I use this comma or not? And, that's really getting into the weeds. But my point of that is you try to provide a uniformity of experience across the whole collection for the readers. And sometimes that can be difficult, especially when you have international writers. I try very specifically not to impose my American usage and American style on David Adams, who's in Australia. Because, he's going to use a bunch of U's. When he spells words, it's going to have too many U's in it. But that's okay because, number one, he's Australian. That's how they spell it, and that's what his readers expect. So it's really a balancing act of trying to provide a uniform experience for the reader, but also allow each writer to have their own unique voice and their own unique approach.
Says a man who has 2 useless U's in his last name.
Hey, man, I can't help my French heritage. That's what I go with.
I love it. Anne and Justin, I don't normally write stories at the end of the world, but there's something awfully freeing about writing kind of when you have nothing else to lose other than everything. Do you guys have a different take on writing kind of apocalyptic stories and stories where the stakes are so high and there might not be any coming back from it? What about you, Anne?
Well, considering that my call sign in the military was Quad, which means Queen of Darkness, then,
Nice.
It's really not a surprise that most of my books deal with, really bad things. So for me, I find it incredibly, there's just something good about exploring what people do. And not all of mine are, necessarily happy endings. One of my books, The Ways We End, is just dark. But in general, I find that exploring good people as well as bad people is an immensely enjoyable experience for me as an author.
What about you, Justin?
Yeah, so I'm kind of going at it the opposite nowadays, because originally one of my earlier books was dark, and well, I loved it and I loved reading it, and a huge Game of Thrones fan, darkness, all that. A lot of my readers came back to me and was like, dude, so dark. So I've learned a lot working with Michael Anderle, and a lot of it is this whole like going out to kick butt and defeat any odds in our way. And I think the post-apocalyptic world works great for that. If you look at my Reclaiming Honor books, it's all about, it's like the setting is post-apocalyptic. I can never say that. It always mumbles the tongue. But everything in there is just about overcoming odds. And recently, Nick Cole, I'm going to steal this from him, he was talking about how Space Marines, the whole thing there is people are dealing with so much crap in our lives, dealing with cancer, dealing with everything on the news, that it's great to be able to pick up a book and just see the hero or heroine kicking everybody's butt. There's no problem that will totally get in their way. And there's this whole thing where you try to, even if there's like the down moments, like in screenwriting, they talk the dark moment of the soul. And a lot of the stories I try to approach, that will last not very long at all. They'll get there, they'll have those emotional beats, but it's just all about overcoming them. And I like to see that in the post-apocalyptic work I do now, unless people looking at my book that I did with George Mahaffey, who's super dark, unless I'm working with a collaborator who's super dark, and then I let them do their thing.
There's something about just having the stakes super high. Makes you care about the characters more, makes the bond between those characters and these animals seem stronger, more intense. It's a beautiful thing. Chris, why did you choose to revisit? I know the first one was Tales of the Apocalypse, but this was Tales of Dystopia, which is very similar. Why choose these kinds of settings?
Well, I mean, for what you said, and I say it in the foreword to the collection too. I mean, we define ourselves based on the struggles and surviving the struggles that we endure. That defines our character. If we could just sit around and have people feed us and just watch TV all day or whatever a life of luxury without any kind of stress would look like to you, we would become very boring very quickly and very bored very quickly. And in the foreword I mentioned The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and this is a theme that he looks at in that book, where basically the Eloi just sit around and eat fruit all day and wait for the bells to ring until the Morlocks bring them down for food. And this is supposedly the evolution we're all aiming towards, where we're all just we can luxuriate and just relax our lives away. But really, when we do that, we don't really progress. We're not challenged to be more than we are. And so these kinds of environments and story settings really help forge the characters of the protagonists in the story and the animal companions that they have. And one of the things that I really like about these stories and these settings is that the animals themselves become reflective of the protagonist's character. That is the makeup of their character. And often the animals are more self-sacrificing. They're more courageous than their human compatriots in the stories. And so this gives us an opportunity to look at the human spirit and the human experience from a different perspective, from the animal's perspective. And I've heard it said before, and I've said it myself, if I had my choice, I'd just rather be with dogs than humans sometimes, because dogs will never stab you in the back. Dogs will always run to your defense when somebody attacks. They don't think of themselves, they think of you first. And so it's that character of the animal that is reflective of what we would like our own characters to be on our best days that I really like to explore in these stories.
Sean, we, of course, are a portion of the proceeds from this book are going to Pets for Vets, but how can other people how can we support Pets for Vets other than buying a copy of Tales of Dystopia?
Well, right. So as soon as you buy a copy of the book, then you can go to www.petsforvets.com. And on our website, there's a lot you can do. You can see stories of matches. You can make a donation if you like. You can volunteer. All of our folks are all volunteers. And of course, if you're a veteran and you think you can benefit from a companion animal, you're more than welcome to submit an application as well. So www.petsforvets.com.
Excellent. And we're going to send everybody to go see you and put links to everything in the show notes there. Thank you for joining us today, Sean.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Hank, I wanted to mention one thing, that we're specifically, the donation from this anthology is specifically going to the Florida chapter, as like every other organization in Florida are still dealing with the fallout of Hurricane Irma. So we're specifically donating the revenue from this collection to the Florida chapter of Pets for Vets.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and this is Sean again. If anybody, when they're making a donation, if they would like to designate a specific chapter, they're welcome to do that as well.
Excellent. Great to know. And Christy, thank you for joining us today. Where can people find you online if they want to follow along to what you're doing?
www.annchristy.com. But better yet, find me on Facebook. I'm a Facebook junkie, and I love friends. So.
Excellent. We're going to send them to see you. And Justin, what about you? Where can people find you?
I'm online at justinsloanauthor.com, and I believe my Facebook, whatever it is, the slash is also Justin Sloan Author. So either one works.
Ann and Justin, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your service, and thanks for contributing such excellent stories to the collection.
Thanks for having us.
I'll second that.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And Sam Peralta, where can people find you?
Just at my name, like everyone else, as SamuelPeralta.com.
Excellent. And Chris, where are you located?
Same thing, ChrisPourteau.com, but since I have so many U's in my name, let me spell that for you. It's ChrisPourteau.com. teau.com.
Useless use. Thanks for joining us today, guys. We're going to send everybody to go pick up a copy of Tales of Dystopia, and congratulations, everybody, on an awesome book launch.
Thanks, Hank. Congratulations to you, too.
Yeah, congrats to you, too.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hedwig slipped into David's den, the circular reading room. A ladder of crude rungs protruded from the wall, remnant of its days as a grain silo. He pulled himself upward, rung by rung, until the bookcases and sofas were far below. Even if he fell and died, he didn't really care anymore. No, he did care. He couldn't die yet. She had to die first. That would make their divorce final, if she wanted it so much. Darkness enveloped him. He reached the top of the ladder and stepped off onto a catwalk of black mesh, lit only by the faint light of the 4 square windows that encircled the turret. From this perch he could see the exit she would use. He felt like an assassin, like Lee Harvey Oswald in the window of the Texas schoolbook depository. But he wouldn't use a rifle. No, rifles leave evidence. Rifles can be produced in court. Rifles can miss. He pulled back a shroud of burlap and opened the cardboard box he'd stashed up here earlier that day. He reached into it and withdrew the only murder weapon, the only magic bullet a Van Brunt could ever need. The gold lantern flashed in the moonlight. He held it up to the window. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, he thought. And then it's time for a midnight ride. But it won't be Paul Revere. No, not Paul Revere at all. He found the oyster knife at last. He lay his cupped palm sideways over the vent. Don't get blood on your Armani. And stabbed the blade into his palm. The blood came hot. He dripped it into the lantern, where the skull of the horseman waited to sip it like nectar. The reliquary glowed, and an incantation in Old Dutch appeared, shining from within the metal. It was time. Hedwig bent and whispered into the vents. Rise, headless, and ride. The letters vanished, and a cold white light burst from the thing. The skull wasn't just a skull anymore. It had gestated. Capillaries clung to it the way fine hair clings to the crown of a newborn. A thick, carotid artery moved with snake-like undulation, drinking blood from the pool at the base, pulling it upwards to circulate through scarlet vessels, through twisting coils, slurping the liquid greedily, the way little Zeph used to slurp strawberry Nesquik through a crazy straw. The blood pulsed and pushed into the nose, into the eyes, into the hollow cavity within the skull. But was it hollow still? Hedwig didn't think so. He felt a mind growing there, something with a will to challenge his own. He fixed his gaze to the twin caverns of its eye sockets, speaking slowly and deliberately. Jessica Bridge. The death's head grin broadened somehow, and a thread of black and green liquid, shiny as a horsefly's wings, trickled from the gap of a missing eye tooth. Only Jessica Bridge. Do you understand? He shook the lantern. Do you understand? The face lurched forward and struck the glass, leaving a red splash there. It wobbled and settled, smiling and nodding. Jessica Bridge, hissed the face. Yes. Hedwig raised the lantern a little. Jessica Bridge. The red face tipped backwards and the jaw cracked wide. Hedwig recoiled. Something pink and wet writhed inside that mouth. The nub of a new tongue, salivating as if it could taste the name. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge.